Welcome to our final COP27 update, and I am back where I started. I'm back at George Bank, which I visited 2 weeks ago to start off our updates, and it's not pouring with rain today. It's actually a really beautiful day. There's field fares all around me. I can hear them chuckling in the trees, and I've disturbed a couple of roe deer as well. So there's a lot of wildlife around today. Really nice to see it all, and to come back here on a much nicer day to think about what's happened over the past 2 weeks. And I think coming into COP27, what we wanted to see was enhanced action to move us and the rest of the world more towards the 1.5 degree temperature goal. We wanted to see a real ramping up of domestic commitments at home, and we wanted to see a real push for nature-based solutions and the role of nature-based solutions in addressing climate change. On the last of those, it does feel like there's been some momentum. There's definitely a real recognition in some of the final draft text that's coming through that nature-based solutions are really important. On the other two, not so much. So we still don't really see big commitments coming from countries to move their national determinations, their country pledges more towards the 1.5 degree goal. It still feels like that's about as far away as it was at the beginning of COP27. And apart from one announcement by Therese Coffey, who also attended COP27, as did Richard Benyon, she announced the Big Impact Nature Fund, the £30 million fund that I mentioned back on Wednesday. Apart from that, we haven't really seen any big ramping up of domestic commitments. And coming into COP15, the biodiversity COP, in a couple of weeks' time, that's as important as ever. But in terms of what's been happening at COP27 itself, as expected, we still don't have any final text today on what was meant to be the last day of COP. So I think what we'll be seeing over the weekend is very late nights, probably negotiations running through the night to try and get all of the decisions finalised. There's dozens of them that are still outstanding, and even overnight we've had 15 or 20 documents coming into our inboxes with the latest draft text. So that's still a very alive topic that we need to see concluded. And we need to see the final decision text, this covered decision text, being negotiated and being agreed upon. In terms of other issues, there has been a bit more movement on Article 6 on the carbon trading side, which, given our interest in nature-based solutions, we obviously have an ongoing interest in. It's looking still very messy, and the latest text postpones decisions and requests parties to submit views on things like what do we do about avoided emissions in carbon trading? Does that count? And actually for us, that's quite important because most peatland restoration projects would count as an avoided emissions project, not a sequestration project, because when you're restoring peatlands, you're actually reducing the emissions off the peatland, at least to begin with. Parties are also being asked to give views on things like permanence, on reversals of removals, i.e. what happens if you have a wildfire in a woodland, that sort of thing. All these issues, which we think about as well in terms of carbon trading in the voluntary market, haven't really moved that much further at COP27, and the text is looking quite messy. And of course that has ramifications for carbon trading domestically as well, not just because we need to think about how the international carbon trading system and any voluntary carbon markets work together in the future. The big thing there is making sure we're not double counting emissions reductions and removals within the international system, and there's still a really live debate going on about how to achieve that. The other text that we were keeping an eye on was loss and damage, and again that's still at a bit of a stalemate. So the big issue here is whether we're talking about a single fund or multiple funds, who pays and who receives the funds, and which countries are deemed most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And again, that issue might run right through the weekend. We'll have to see where that goes in the final text. One thing that I've really noticed though in this COP is a more direct voicing of what the global goal on adaptation might be. We've talked about process on adaptation for a long time, but seeing actually movement towards defining what adaptation targets, what adaptation goals look like in the global text, that's been really encouraging to see. We'll be keeping an eye on the final few days of COP27 and publishing a statement on our website early next week, just rounding up where all of the decisions have got to, and of course how nature has featured in all of those final negotiations. But really our attention now is focusing on COP15, which is the biodiversity COP that will be taking place in Montreal in Canada from the 7th of December. And this COP is critically important. The latest global statistics suggest we've lost 70% of biodiversity since 1970. That's on the scale of a global extinction. Of course, for us, the role for nature is becoming increasingly critical in the climate discussions. There is no climate stability without nature. There is no climate resilience without nature. And there's no food security. There's no health and well-being without nature either. So really by Christmas, after these dual COPs, going from COP27 into COP15, we need to see that increased ambition, that increased action, that increased finance being paid to nature. And hopefully by Christmas, we'll see a new set of global targets, a renewed set of pledges to protect and to restore nature globally, and to see that action taking place in the UK and at home as well. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.